Something is happening right now that should send a chill down the spine of every person invested in the future of the American economy. We are witnessing a historic transformation, but not the kind that brings growth. Instead, we are seeing the literal heart of global finance, Wall Street, ripping itself out of New York City and moving elsewhere. This isn't a minor trend or a couple of firms having a rough season. We are in the middle of a massive systematic evacuation that has been brewing for a decade and has now shifted into overdrive. If you look around your own city, you might be seeing the same patterns of corporate flight, and I want to hear about it in the comments. Is your local economy feeling this shift, or are you in one of the states where all this wealth is landing? This is a real-time collapse of the traditional blue city economic model, and the data behind it is staggering. To understand the scale of this disaster, you have to look at the numbers, and quite frankly, they look like a typo, but they are cold, hard facts. Back in 2005, New York City was the undisputed king of American business, hosting 125 Fortune 500 companies. These are the giants, the engines of the global economy. Fast forward to today, and that number has plummeted to just 50. In less than 20 years, New York has surrendered 60% of its elite corporate base. The crown has been snatched away. Texas now boasts 54 of these massive corporations and is gaining more every year, while Florida's roster is expanding at a breakneck pace. This isn't just a change in geography, it's a total reimagining of where the American dream is actually being built. Perhaps the most symbolic blow of all involves J.P. Morgan Chase. This is the institution that essentially invented the concept of Wall Street. In the minds of the public, J.P. Morgan and New York City are inseparable. Yet the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Today, this banking titan employs more people in Texas than it does in Manhattan. Let that sink in for a moment. There are now 32,000 J.P. Morgan employees in the Lone Star State compared to only 24,000 left in the city that supposedly serves as the bank's headquarters. The financial sector in New York is bleeding out, losing 8,400 jobs in the first half of this year alone. Compare that to the same window last year when they were still adding thousands of positions. We are looking at a massive 15,000 job swing in the wrong direction within a single year. This isn't just a cooling off period, it is a structural disintegration. And just when the situation reached a breaking point, the political climate took a turn for the radical. The election of Zoran Mumani as mayor has acted like a catalyst for a process that was already dangerous. Running on a hardcore democratic socialist platform, Mumani didn't just suggest higher taxes. He campaigned on the idea that corporations and high earners are the enemy. When you tell the people who fund your city's infrastructure that they are the villains, they don't stick around to argue. They leave. We are now seeing what experts are calling the Mumani Migration. Relocation lawyers in Florida are being overwhelmed with calls from New York firms looking for the exit. These aren't just small boutiques, these are major pillars of the economy, with thousands of staff and millions in tax contributions. The signal sent to the market was deafening. A socialist took the wheel, and the captains of industry decided to jump ship before the boat even left the dock. They aren't waiting to see if his policies will be as damaging as his rhetoric. They are moving their families, their capital, and their futures to the south as fast as they can file the paperwork. The reason for this flight is rooted in a tax nightmare that most mainstream outlets refuse to discuss honestly. If you are a high achiever in New York City, you are being cannibalized by the state and local government. Between the state's top income tax rate of nearly 11% and the city's additional 4% bite, top earners are losing 15% of their paycheck before they even start thinking about federal taxes. To put that in perspective, a professional making $200,000 a year is paying about $13,000 more in annual taxes just for the privilege of living in New York compared to Florida. That isn't just a statistical difference. That is a college fund, a down payment on a home, or significant capital that could be reinvested. Instead, it's being swallowed by a bureaucracy in Albany and City Hall that seems increasingly hostile to the people paying the bills. For the corporations themselves, the math is even more brutal. While New York hits businesses with a corporate tax rate that can exceed 6.5%, Florida offers a lower rate and, crucially, zero state income tax. Financial analysts have noted that a firm moving from a high-priced Manhattan office to a hub in Boca Raton could slash its operating expenses by over 22% almost overnight. When you can save $7 or $8 million a year just by changing your zip code, the decision becomes a no-brainer. The professionals on Wall Street are, if nothing else, experts at math. They see the writing on the wall, and they are choosing survival over loyalty to a city that no longer wants them. But the real tragedy, the part that keeps urban planners awake at night, is the multiplier effect. When a giant like JP Morgan moves 32,000 jobs to Texas, they aren't just moving desks. They are removing 32,000 people who used to buy coffee at the corner deli, eat at local restaurants, rent Manhattan apartments, and shop at local retail stores. Every corporate departure triggers a domino effect that crushes the small businesses left behind. The subway loses ridership, the dry cleaners lose customers, and the gyms sit empty. This economic energy doesn't just evaporate, it reappears in Dallas, Austin, and Miami, fueling a boom in the South while New York enters a doom loop. This cycle is becoming self-sustaining. As the offices empty out, commercial real estate values crater. When buildings lose value, the city loses property tax revenue. When the budget shrinks, public services like policing, sanitation, and education begin to decline. And as the city becomes less safe and less clean, even more businesses and families decide to leave. It is a downward spiral that is incredibly difficult to stop once it gains momentum. New York officials have tried to offer band-aid solutions like temporary tax breaks or subsidized rent, but the business community sees through it. You can't fix a deep structural wound with a temporary incentive, especially when the political leadership is openly hostile to private property and success. Why would a CEO bet the future of their company on a city where the mayor views them as an ATM for socialist experiments? The contrast between the decline of the North and the rise of the South was perfectly captured recently when Texas Governor Greg Abbott visited the New York Stock Exchange. He didn't just visit, he rang the closing bell, essentially declaring victory on New York's home turf. He was there to promote the Texas model, zero income tax, a stable regulatory environment, and a government that views business as a partner rather than an adversary. The response from New York leadership was one of defensive arrogance, but the message to the world was clear. One side is confident and growing, the other is bitter and retreating. This isn't just a political debate anymore, it is an economic reality. The data regarding migration to Florida alone is almost hard to wrap your head around. In just a 5-year window, over 125,000 New Yorkers packed up and moved to the Sunshine State, taking over $9 billion in annual income with them. That is a permanent transfer of wealth that New York will never get back. This isn't about the weather or the beaches. It's about the fact that Florida's government actually wants people to succeed. They offer a lower cost of living and better take-home pay, allowing companies to attract the best talent in the world without the burden of New York's suffocating tax regime. The economics are now so lopsided that staying in New York is becoming an act of financial negligence for many firms. Here is the second and final part of your script. I have continued the narrative flow, focusing on the long-term consequences, the red state renaissance, and the broader impact on America, ensuring it remains unique and engaging for YouTube. Part 2, the point of no return. What we are witnessing is the acceleration of the doom loop, and this is where the story gets truly terrifying for anyone living in a major blue city. We have officially passed the tipping point where the decline becomes self-reinforcing. Think about the mechanics of a failing city. As the massive corporations flee, the tax base evaporates. To cover the massive budget deficits, the city government is left with only two choices. Either they cut essential services like transit and safety, or they hike taxes even higher on the people who stayed. If they cut services, the city becomes unlivable, dirty, and dangerous, which drives away the middle class. If they raise taxes, they punish the very people they need to keep, forcing them to look at Florida or Texas as their only viable options. Either way, the result is the same. More people leave, the revenue drops further, and the cycle repeats with more intensity. New York is now deep into this spiral. And how is the current leadership responding? by proposing even more government spending, more regulations, and even higher burdens on the remaining wealth. It's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it and then acting surprised when the flames reach the ceiling. Supporters of these radical policies often claim they are standing up to greed or fighting for the little guy. But the reality is that the wealthy are the only ones who can afford to leave. They have the mobility. They have the resources to move their capital to Miami or Austin overnight. The person who truly suffers when a tax base collapses is the working class citizen. It's the waiter who loses his job because the Wall Street firm next door moved to Dallas. It's the subway commuter who deals with crumbling infrastructure because the city can no longer afford maintenance. When the economic ecosystem that made New York the capital of the world is dismantled, the elite will be fine. They'll just be watching the collapse from their new balconies in the South. This isn't just a New York story. It is a blueprint for the decline of blue cities across the entire country. We are seeing the exact same pattern of corporate and middle-class evacuation in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, and Chicago. For generations, these coastal hubs held a monopoly on American economic power. If you wanted to make it big in tech, you went to the Bay Area. If you wanted to dominate finance, you went to Manhattan. That era is ending in real time. The geographic monopoly has been shattered. The future of American business is now being written in states like Tennessee, North Carolina, Arizona, and Florida, places that actually view growth as a goal rather than a grievance. While the old guard of the American economy is busy doubling down on the very policies that drove their residents away, we are seeing a genuine red state renaissance. This isn't an accident of history. It is the direct result of intentional policy choices. When you create an environment with reasonable regulations, low taxes, and a government that treats entrepreneurs with respect, talent follows the opportunity. Young professionals are no longer convinced they have to endure the high costs and dysfunction of a coastal city to have a successful career. They are choosing Nashville over Seattle and Miami over San Francisco because they want a better quality of life and the ability to actually keep the money they earn. The old stereotype that you had to live in a blue state to be at the cutting edge of industry is dead. The most exciting tech hubs and financial centers are now popping up in places that New York elites used to dismiss as flyover country. This is a complete reversal of the American economic map as we knew it 20 years ago. The wealth, the brains, and the energy of the country are moving, and they aren't looking back. As Mayor Mumani prepares to implement his agenda of government seizures and hostile corporate regulations, the exodus is only going to hit higher speeds. Relocation attorneys are preparing for a record-breaking year. Real estate agents in the South are bracing for a wave of new buyers. Meanwhile, New York is sliding toward economic irrelevance, sustained only by the momentum of its past glory. The question we have to ask is, at what point does this become irreversible? How much of the infrastructure and talent can a city lose before it can never truly come back? We are approaching a moment where the brain drain and the transfer of wealth become permanent. New York lost its absolute dominance decades ago, but it survived on the back of Wall Street. Now that Wall Street itself is packing its bags, the safety net is gone. The city is being led by people who view the engines of prosperity as enemies to be punished. Unless there is a fundamental shift in leadership and logic, the next chapter of American prosperity will be written entirely without the cities that once defined us. This is the great economic realignment of our time. It's a shift from states that prioritize ideology to states that prioritize opportunity. It would be a tragedy if it weren't so predictable. New York had every advantage, the history, the capital, the global brand, and it is throwing it all away in pursuit of a socialist experiment that has failed everywhere it has ever been tried. The winner of this struggle isn't a political party. It's the states that understand that freedom and prosperity are linked. Texas is winning, Florida is winning, and they are doing it with the very resources that New York was too arrogant to keep.